What's up guys, welcome back to Deck Tech for Decks. I'm your host Caleb. If you want to support me, you can now follow me on Patreon. Not only is it the best way to support the channel directly, additionally you'll get more say in what deck techs I covered. Special shout out to all of you high contributing Patreons. Newsome, you rock, I couldn't do it without you guys. Additionally, you can always use that TCGplayer link in the description down below, or as always just liking, commenting, subscribing will do the trick. Now let's get into today's deck tech with Greta. And honestly, I pulled her in draft, had a lot of fun, and I was like, man, we could make a budget build work. She's got a lot of synergies that work with Golgari, right? We've got creatures entering the battlefield, creating food tokens, sacrificing them for value to bring them back in, create more food tokens, and then she's got card draw on her. She's got a way to buff up our creatures, which can be incredibly abusable with stuff like Viridian Joiner. That way we can buff them up, tap them for a lot of mana, and cast our giant creature spells that we will then sacrifice for value. Additionally, there is a very budget infinite combo that draws your deck. So if you want to see that, hey, let's get into this deck tech. The first thing we need to do is generate food tokens, that way we can start drawing cards and making our creatures massive. Killer Service is going to be super solid at this because it's going to net us at least 3 food tokens if we're in a 4-player game, and then we'll have the option to even turn those food tokens into 4/4 rhinos, which can be incredibly useful. Feasting Troll King. Now this guy's expensive, but not only will you get a 7/6 with Vigilance and Trample when he enters the battlefield, as long as you casted him, you'll be able to create 3 food tokens. Additionally, this is a very good value piece for something like Greater Good or Life's Legacy, drawing a lot of cards just by sacrificing this guy, and then we have the ability to return him back to our hand. It's a kind of slow engine we can create in the deck. Brandywine Farmer is just a solid card that's going to create a food token on ETB and when it leaves the battlefield, so we can use something like Witch's Oven to even create 3 food tokens in this scenario. Tough Cookie is going to be another solid card because it kind of creates 2 food tokens since he himself is a food token. Then we'll get 2 additional foods that we can sacrifice, and there's a lot of way to reanimate creatures from our graveyard just to bring this guy back onto the battlefield. That way we always have fodder. Voracious Fellbeast, another solid way we can hate on our opponents while creating food tokens. They're gonna have to sacrifice creatures, we get food tokens, and then again if we sacrifice this guy and find a way to loop him through our graveyard, that's just going to be super oppressive. Rapacious Guest. Not only can we make this thing massive and then sacrifice it to deal a ton of damage to our opponents, it's also a solid way to create more food tokens, especially since it has menace. So it's a big giant creature with menace, creates food tokens, and as long as we can get a creature in on each of our opponents, that's 3 food per turn. Savvy Hunter. While I think this card would be much better with Vigilance, it's still okay here. All we have to do is attack once per turn and we're netting a food, not terrible. Tireless Provisioner. Not only can we net food, but we can also net treasures with this girl. Knight of the Sweet Revenge. Not only is this going to turn all of those food tokens into mana, it can also be a solid game ender. All we need is something that gives all of our creatures trample, which I did shove a couple of those in the deck, and then we can just sack all of our food tokens and kill everybody with a massive overrun effect. The Underworld Cookbook can be a pretty card in this deck. We can discard all of those big beaters that we have no shot of casting early game. That way we can generate food tokens to draw cards with our commander into more useful cards, and then notably sometimes we just want some of those big beaters in the graveyard. That way we can reanimate them more easily. Pippin is another way we can get a food token at least once per turn, and then he does have that small overrun effect that can be pretty impactful. Academy Manufacturer definitely had to make the list. With all the food tokens we are creating, it's just going to be better that we are also going to get treasure tokens and clues along with them. Pretty busted. Now let's talk about that infinite combo, Experimental Confectioner and Paragon Took. Not only are these 2 bombs in the card, but all we'll need to do is have 3 food tokens on the battlefield, sacrifice them to Paragon Took to draw 3 cards, and then Experimental Confectioner will see that you sacrificed 3 food tokens, so you're going to make 3 rats, and then Paragon Took will make 3 food tokens. So then you can again sacrifice 3 food tokens. This creates a loop where you will get infinite rats, you'll get to sacrifice all the food in the world, and then you'll get to draw your deck. The rats won't have haste, and we don't have a way to give them haste in this deck, so we're planning on winning through something like either a Mirkwood Bat, Agent of the Iron Throne, or Marionette Master. That way we're draining our opponents whenever we are sacrificing those food tokens, creating tokens. It's just a lot of damage flying around that will end our opponents. One last interaction I want to cover that might be confusing for some people is Chatterfang and Paragon Took. You might be asking yourself, if I have both of these on the battlefield, isn't it just all the tokens, all the food, all the squirrels, everything I could want? No, not exactly. You have to stack the triggers, and then whichever one triggers last will create the more tokens. But you definitely want to have Gtahering trigger last, because Peregrine Took will only create one token no matter what. So, to put it simply, if we have Academy Manufacturer on the field and something enters the battlefield creating a food token, we're not only going to net one food token, we're going to net a food, a treasure, and a clue token, right? And then Peregrine Took will see that, hey, you created tokens, you get an additional food token, and then when Gtahering triggers, you're going to get 4 squirrels because of the original tokens and the token from Peregrine Took. Now let's swap those triggers to see how that's going to work if we had Gtahering trigger first. Academy Manufacturer will trigger, making 3 tokens, a food, a clue, and a treasure, and then Gtahering will trigger, making 3 squirrel tokens. Then you'll have the Peregrine Took trigger, and you'll only make 1 food still. So, like I said, you definitely want to make sure that Gtahering triggers last to create the most tokens and give you the more bang for your buck. Moving on to the core of the deck, we have golgari. Now, I like this here because we can make some massive creatures with our commander, and then again, we just have massive creatures in the deck, so being able to sacrifice them to go wide can be super solid, especially with all of our overrun effects. Tend the Pests is honestly better because you can do it on your opponent's end step, create a massive board state no one was expecting, and then attack everybody for lethal on your turn. Old One-Eye, this is just going to give all of our creatures trample. It's going to create 2 big bodies, and we can sacrifice those 2 big bodies to either our effects that make creatures or our card draw effects like Greater Good. Valentin and Lisette. I like these 2 here because they both do the opposite thing, right? If you need a board state, you can use Valentin to go ahead and create a board state while being some super solid graveyard hate, and then Lisette late game, if we already have a board state, can buff up our board state and give them that super impactful trample ability. Blossoming Bog Beast, one of the more expensive includes, but honestly it had to make the list. Sacrifice a food token and you're going to give all of your creatures +5/+5. With any kind of meaningful board state, this guy's just going to win you the game. Vat of Rebirth, we are sacrificing a lot of tokens, a lot of creatures, so it's not hard to get the counters on this and start reanimating our bombs from the graveyard. Lich Knight's Conquest, again, another solid way to sacrifice our food tokens for a lot of value, just bringing our biggest stuff from our graveyard onto the battlefield. Eternal Witness is going to be super solid to bring our creatures back from the graveyard. Again, it's another thing we can loop through the graveyard with Marin of Clan Nel Toth, a solid way to get value, get all our creatures or permanents we need back to our hand. It's just going to be an amazing engine. Swiftfoot Boots, protecting those creatures that need to be protected is going to be solid. Plus, it gives haste to some of our more impactful creatures that need to have haste, like golgari or Blossoming Bog Beast. It can really catch our opponents off guard. Moving on to ramp, I'm really excited about the package we get to run. Viridian Joiner, Cradle Clearcutter, Hornblade Elite, and Kami of Whispered Hopes. These are going to be solid creatures to buff up with our commander. That way we are tapping them for a ton of mana, getting all of our bombs onto the battlefield. Llanowar War Elves and Elvish Mystic are just going to be solid 1-drops. Incubation Druid again synergizes with our commander. If we can get a counter on it for 1 mana instead of 5, that's just going to be amazing. Rampant Growth and Nature's Lore, just really effective ramp. Cultivate and Kodama's Reach. I really like these cards because not only do they ramp you, but they're going to ensure that you have a land card to drop the turn after that as well. Sky Shroud Claim can be super solid because those just grab the 2 lands and put them right into play. Eleanor Gardner, not only is she going to net us a food when she ETBs, but if we sacrificed a food this turn, which is that's all the deck does, we're going to net a land and put it right onto the battlefield. Inspiring Statuary, another way we can tap those food tokens for mana. Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and that's going to do it for the ramp package. Moving on to card advantage, we have Momentous Fall, Life's Legacy, and Greater Good. Sacrificing those massive creatures to draw a ton of cards can really keep us in the late game. Sign of Blood and Read the Bones are just going to be solid early game cards to make sure we're drawing the pieces we need. God Eternal Bontu does a couple things in the deck. One, he's pretty massive, so he's going to be a solid option to sacrifice to something like a golgari or again Greater Good, and that's just going to tuck him back into our library and we can draw him back into our hand. Super awesome because we can stack the triggers that way. Additionally, he wants to sacrifice permanents, so we can sacrifice all of those food tokens to refill our hand for free instead of having to spend 2 mana using our commander. Rishkar's Expertise, just a solid draw spell whenever we're playing big creatures, and Return of the Wild Speaker. Another overrun effect, but in a pinch, it can also just draw us a ton of cards. Let's be honest, we're drawing the cards more than the overrun effect. Moving on to removal, we have our super flexible picks with Beast Within, and then we have Go for the Throat. Now, Beast Within's better because it can get rid of any permanent, but we'll still take Go for the Throat here. Reclamation Sage and Caustic Caterpillar can be super solid just to get rid of those enchantments and artifacts. Cavalier of Night. I really like looping this guy with Eternal Witness. Now, this isn't infinite by any means, but the fact that we can cast Cavalier of Night, sacrificing Eternal Witness to then sacrifice Cavalier of Night to any of our sack effects, bringing Eternal Witness back to the battlefield, putting Cavalier of Night back into our hand is pretty solid, making it to where it can be super oppressive for our opponents, really not being able to land any of their impactful creatures. Nature's Claim, another solid artifact or enchantment removal. Cooling Ritual. I really like this here because if we have a lot of food tokens on the field and not a lot else, we can not only get rid of some of our opponents' other value pieces or token strategies, while giving us a solid ritual to get back into the game. Rampage of Clans, another solid card for if we have a ton of food tokens, right? Now it's this massive board wipe that hoses over the enchantments and artifact players while just giving us a massive board state. Bane of the Living is honestly just a super budget toxic deluge in this deck. Massacre Worm has honestly won me games. I've had people in commanding positions, it looks like you're dead next turn, they have hundreds of tokens, but no haste. Then you cast Massacre Worm and they just die outright. Everybody rejoices, and then killing the other two players should be pretty simple from there. Azuri's Predation, again another scenario where someone creates a ton of tokens and they pass the turn waiting to untap and decimate everybody. Azuri's Predation can completely turn the tides of battle, putting you ahead of them, and you'll win the game from there. That's going to do it for the deck tech, guys. Let me know if you're enjoying these budget builds, let me know if you like the breakdown of the additional interactions with the cards, and also let me know if I'm wrong. I'm definitely not perfect and not a judge by any means, but I'm doing my best out here. One last thing, I'd like to thank all of my Patreons. I definitely couldn't do it without you. I appreciate every one of you. As always, I hope this helped you in your deck building endeavors, and I will see you in the next one.